Audio Jungle. Audio Jungle. Audio Jungle.
Hello students, this is Jeet and you are watching the lecture 1 for chemistry CH101, the chemistry course for your first year classes. So basically, as this is the first lecture, we will be seeing multiple things. We'll discuss about all the modules that are present in the entire syllabus for the semester. Along with that, we'll talk about some of the prerequisites that you people have seen in class 11 and 12. So if we consider the chemistry syllabus of class 11 and 12, in class 11 basically you have seen about the atomic structure, followed by the kinetic theory of gases, thermodynamics, equilibrium, redox reactions. Also you have seen chemical bonding and the basic details about the organic chemistry. In class 12, you have seen some more detailed topics like lots of chemical reactions about the alcohol phenol ethers, haloalkane, haloaridine, aldehyde, ketone, carboxylic acids. Along with that, you have seen solutions, electrochemistry, chemical kinetics, and lots of other chapters, the periodic table related chapters and all. So basically, engineering chemistry is a combination of this total syllabus of class 11 and class 12. Now here, it is interesting to note that you will see type of things are present, like there are basically 5 modules in the syllabus. Now if we go to module 1, the module 1 is entirely devoted to inorganic chemistry, right? So here basically we are having 2 chapters. The first one is atomic structure, the second one is periodic table. Now this atomic structure chapter, that is chapter 1 of module 1, it has 4 lectures. And this is the lecture 1. That means in this particular lecture we'll study about atomic structure. Along with that, there are 3 other lectures of this particular module. Now how these 3 lectures are divided, that I will discuss with you. But before that, let us discuss about the whole syllabus that we people are having. So as I've already told you, that module 1 contains the atomic structure and the periodic properties. So it is devoted totally to inorganic chemistry, right? Second thing is that module 2 contains physical chemistry, where we will be seeing the chapter named use of free energy in chemical equilibria, and we'll be having kinetic theory of gases. Now this use of free energy in chemical equilibria, I think you have never heard about this type of typical name, because this type of name does not exist in chemistry. AICT is very clever. AICT actually has merged thermodynamics and electrochemistry together, and they have made this chapter which is called use of free energy in chemical equilibria, right? So in this chapter we are having topics from thermodynamics and electrochemistry together, okay? But thermodynamics totally is not there. Some basic things are not there, but we have to study, because without the basics the chapter will be meaningless, right? So we will be studying, there are 6 lectures from thermodynamics that we people need to study. Along with that, there are 2 lectures of the second chapter of module 2, that is the kinetic theory of gases, basically real gases, okay? So real gases, I think you are having some idea regarding ideal gases and real gases, so I think it will not be very difficult for us to discuss about it. So we will do it gradually. If we move to the next part, it contains, there is a module 3 I am talking about. It contains organic chemistry. How many of you are feared about organic? Okay, so you can write it in chat box, or we can discuss it in the class also. I think I'll find many persons who are very much what I can say feared about organic chemistry, but believe me, it is not that difficult. It is quite easy. Things are not difficult, we just make it difficult. Always remember this thing, okay? Everything is fine, nothing is that much problematic that we cannot solve it out, okay? If we can solve everything. So if we go to the module 3, that is the organic chemistry part, what we are going to get, we'll be getting first of all the stereochemistry part. Now stereochemistry, what does it means, we will discuss later on. Little glimpses I'll give you here. The stereochemistry basically contains the total stereogenic functions of different molecules, okay? For example, cis trans, I think you people have seen the cis trans isomer, PAC-MAR isomer. So these total things are combined in under one particular topic, which is called stereochemistry, right? After stereochemistry, we are having the most fearful things here, right? And that is nothing but organic chemistry. Okay, so organic reactions basically. So under this, not that much complicated reactions are there. Rather, the reactions which are present are substitution reactions are there, elimination reactions are there, addition reactions are there, oxidation and reduction reactions are also present here. Okay, so these are the total things that we people are having. Now accordingly, we will be studying the chapters. The fourth module contains industrial chemistry. Okay, now industrial chemistry means what type of chemical species are used in the industries. So it will include the water related studies. Along with that, there are a chapter called polymers, and how drugs are made, that is also included there. And apart from this, we are having some glimpses of semiconductors also, right? So after that, we are finally into the module 5. Now module 5 contains your spectroscopy part. Now spectroscopy, I think you people have not studied to that extent. Rather, you have studied inside the atomic structure only. That spectroscopy contains, it is basically of two types. Whatever you have studied, I am saying that because it is a multiple times which I think you people are not aware of, right? So what things are present basically? Spectroscopy contains, here we will see 3 different types of spectroscopies. Though you know only about absorption spectra and emission spectra, here we'll be seeing UV visible spectroscopy, IR spectroscopy, and NMR spectroscopy. Okay, now this UV visible, IR and NMR, all 3 comes under atom absorption and emission spectra. So all this together we will be seeing here. So stay tuned and see this lecture from the beginning to the end, and gradually after the end there are some questions. Try to solve the questions. If you are unable to solve it, don't worry, right? Just jot it down on a piece of paper and discuss it with me, and we will solve it out. Okay, so let's see the lecture. So here we will see about the Rutherford atomic model. Ernest Rutherford was born in New Zealand, right, in the 19th century, and he discovered the most innovative idea at that time, that is the Rutherford atomic model, which was based on his alpha particle scattering experiment. Now you people have already learnt about the alpha particle scattering experiment in classes 9 to 12. You know that there remains an alpha particle emitter, or we say it is a source, and then the slits and one gold plate or gold foil, and there is a screen, right, to detect the different radiations. So initially what will happen, from the source the alpha particle will go as like a beam. They will pass through the slit using which they will be filtered, right, into a single beam. The source, the combination of different beams will be converted into a single monochromatic beam of light, monochromatic beam of alpha particle we can say, and it will strike the gold foil, where they will strike with atoms present in the gold foil, and they will get scattered along different directions and will be detected by the detector or the screen which was coated with zinc sulfide, right, as you can see clearly from the diagram. Now the gold atom that Rutherford had used was only 1000 atoms thick, so it is very very thin. And what might have happened, the alpha particles, when they are passing through the atom, right, it may happen that they are not striking anything and they were just going as on along their straight path. Some may just strike with the nucleus and will be deflected by small angles, those who will go close to the nucleus, and others who are directly hitting the nucleus, they will be bounced back by 180 degree, right? Now depending on this particular observations that Rutherford have seen from his alpha particle scattering experiment, Rutherford postulated that an atom is a very very small small sized particle, and each atom consists of another very small core, right, positively charged core, which is very very small compared to the structure of the atom, and this core was usually found to be present, was expected to be present rather, at the center of the atom, right? So basically, as the large part of the alpha particles went
undeflected, right, without any problem, just they're coming and they're going straight, right? He concluded that majority of the portion of the atom is empty, right? Okay, now this particular positive charge was supposed to be concentrated at the center, and this few alpha particle beams or monochromatic rays which were deflected by small angles, they were supposed to be, because they were going close through the nucleus, so they're deflected by small angles, right? And very small, almost very few particles were deflected back, were bounced back, because they strike the nucleus directly, right? So this fraction may be like what I can say, 80 is to 12 is to 80 is to 12 is to 2 or something, right? So very few. So depending on this, Rutherford postulated his conclusions, right? Now what these conclusions or postulates are, that we will see one by one, but before that we will try to find out that in reality what was the observation, what was the ground behind the postulates that Rutherford has given, right? So basically it may be concluded in 3 points. The first point says that large amount of the alpha particles went undeflected. This means that large amount of space will be empty, right? Number 2 means that as the nucleus, the positively charged core, the nucleus name was first given by Rutherford himself. So as it is very small in size, it means that those particles who went using deflection, who were deflected by angles like 120 degree, 90 degree, 45 degree or something, right? So they went close to the nucleus. Okay, that's why they were deflected. And very few, maybe 2% or 3%, this rays actually were bounced back. Their spots were not found on the screen because they went back, right? So they were deflected by 180 degree as they struck the nucleus directly, head on head. Okay, so after this we will move towards the postulates of Rutherford's theory. Now when the postulates comes, what Rutherford has said is very important for us. Rutherford has said that the atom will be composed of positively charged particles, right? Atom will be composed of positively charged particles. Now these positively charged particles are concentrated at the core, at the center of the atom, right? They are expected to be circular. The core was expected to be circular, right? So all the total positive charge, whatever it is present in the atom, was concentrated in a very small region, which was called the heart of the atom or the core of the atom, right? And this was given a name by Rutherford for the very first time. It was given a name by Ernest Rutherford, right? And the name was nothing but nucleus. So from that time we have come up with the fact that what is nucleus, how it looks like. Before that, before Rutherford, we had few models like the plum pudding model, right, given by J.J. Thomson. Now there he has not explained any presence of the nucleus sort of thing. Rather he used to say that the total positive charge was distributed throughout the atom, right? Just like the seeds present in a watermelon or the fruits are present in a pudding, right? But that theory was overthrown because Rutherford, by using his experiment, the alpha particle scattering experiment, he clearly noticed that it is not possible, right? It is not possible because most of the alpha particles went undeflected, right? So if there was a positive charge, alpha particle itself is positive charge, and from the concept of physics, everybody knows that like charges repel each other. So if the positive charge was throughout the atom, then definitely it would have been reflected, right? It would have been reflected. But this doesn't happen. Rather, what happened? The alpha particles were undeflected, which means the space was empty. Okay. So the first postulate of Rutherford clearly stated that the positively charged particles was concentrated in a very small region, and this small region was called nucleus by the atom. Now, only nucleus only contains protons or neutrons or both, right? See, that was not concluded by Rutherford at that time, because Rutherford didn't make an experiment regarding the presence of neutrons, right? But later on, the Canel rays were passed, and it was invented that nucleus contains both neutrons and protons. Okay, so nobody at the time of Rutherford, there was no existence about the neutrons, right? It was found later on. Okay. Now, in the second postulate, Rutherford had said that the negatively charged particles, which were called electrons, right, which were previously detected using cathode rays, okay, these electrons revolve in a very, very high speed, right? They revolve in a very, very high speed, and see, this revolving type of thing, this is not going on without proper arrangement of electrons, because otherwise what will happen, the electrons are all revolving in their own way and they will just collide with each other, and some sort of destruction or blast may happen, right? But this is not going on. Basically, Rutherford said that there were fixed paths, right? There were fixed paths for these electrons to revolve, to rotate, and these fixed paths, were also given a proper name, which was called orbits, right? So Rutherford, in his second postulate, said that the electrons are the negatively charged particles present in an atom, and they will revolve in specific fixed paths, which are called orbits, right? And these orbits are situated around the nucleus. Now, in what fashion, that Rutherford has not signified in his postulate. Okay. So, moving on to the third postulate, Rutherford had said that the atom will be electrically neutral. Why? Because the positive and negative charges, these will be together, right? Number of positive charges will be equal to the number of negative charges. So if we consider in that sense, the atom should be electrically neutral. That is what Rutherford had said in his third postulate, right? Now, this electrically neutral sort of thing, how and why it is important to us, because see, nucleus is positive, electrons are negative, okay? So only if same number of electrons and protons are present in an atom, then only their electrostatic attraction will be there, okay? Just like centripetal and centrifugal forces that exist in the solar system, right? We can compare these strong electrostatic forces of attraction. It is similar to that of the forces that are present in our solar system, right? That we say regarding sun and earth and planets, okay? And the fourth postulate was also very important from the Rutherford atomic model. Rutherford had said that the nucleus will be very, very small sized compared to that of the atom, right? So later, after many years, it has been found out that nucleus is around 10 to the power minus 10 to the power minus 15 times much more smaller than that of the atom, right? Size of atom, okay? So these are the things that Rutherford has said in his postulates, right? Now, after the Rutherford's model was on, right? Every model, as we know that nothing comes with 100% clearance, right? So, whenever Rutherford has said that yes, this is my postulate, this is my model, this is what experimentally I have found out, it is not that everything has ended there, okay? It is not that everything has ended there. So something was there which was further to be explained. Basically, when Rutherford has done the experiment, nothing was known, right? But later on, many things were found out, this, that. Now, people tried to correlate this with the Rutherford's atomic model, right? For example, suppose people have found out, okay, fine, I have found out this isotone type of thing, right? Now, how it can be explained using the Rutherford atomic model? Now, this is not at all easy. This is very, very difficult, because whenever Rutherford has done his particular work, then there was no existence of these things. But gradually, later on, they were found out, right? So it is not that everything discovered later can be explained using Rutherford's atomic model, right? But there were many good things that were done by Rutherford in his atomic model, right? And that also we need to see here. There were many merits of Rutherford atomic model, and this merits actually includes very important things that also we will discuss here, because before going to the limitation we should discuss about the merits of this particular. Another important thing was isotope and isobar sort of thing. So isotopes were elements having same atomic number but different mass number, right? For example, if we go for carbon, we can see carbon has three isotopes. One is 12C6, that is the mass number 12, the carbon having mass number 12, another is carbon having mass number 13, and third one is the radioactive carbon having mass number 14. So 12, 13, 14, three mass numbers are there, but the atomic number is same, that is carbon, right? There is carbon C6, 6 is the atomic number of carbon. So these three are called isotopes. Whereas if we go for the isobars, then we can see they have different atomic number but same mass number. We can take the example of 14C carbon and 14 in nitrogen. See, both are having mass number 14, but the atomic number of carbon is 6, whereas that of nitrogen is 7, right? So these were the merits of Rutherford atomic model. Now we should go directly to the demerits or the limitation. I will not say demerit, the limitation or drawbacks of the Rutherford atomic model, right? So the first point is Rutherford was very sorry to say that he was not able to discuss about the stability of an atom, right? Why it is like that? Why he was not able to discuss about the stability of an atom? If we go clearly into the thing, then we will see that Rutherford, whatever postulates he have given, it seems that the electrons present in the atom revolves in a very high speed, presently situated in the orbits, right? So they were present in the orbit and they were revolving with very high speed, right? Now there was another scientist named James Maxwell. Okay, so Maxwell said that whenever the charged species were accelerated, then what will happen? They will release radiation, and due to this their energy will gradually fall, right? So if electron is definitely a charged particle with negative charge, and if it is moving with a very high speed as per Rutherford had said, right, around the nucleus, then what would have happened? The electron, the energy of the electron will go off and off, right? That will decrease with time, and gradually if the energy decreases, the electron will move towards the nucleus. Okay, so one time will come when this electron will fall into the nucleus, it will collide with the nucleus, which will result in the shrinking of the atom, right? The atom will shrink, it will collapse. But if we consider both Rutherford and Maxwell together, right, so within 10 to 8 seconds an atom would have been collapsed, but it is not happening in reality. That means there was some problem regarding the discussion of orbits and this movement of electrons by the Rutherford atomic model, right? So this is very, very important, that Rutherford was not that much successful in explaining that how the electrons move. He has said something regarding that, but the theory was not complete. It does not justify the experimental fact that was given by Maxwell, right? So whatever drawbacks were there for the Rutherford's atomic model, they were cleared in the next model by another scientist named Niels Bohr, right? Now Bohr was born in 1885, right? And Bohr explained in his theory clearly regarding the atoms and their concepts, right, by using a term called stationary orbits. As we can see, that one of the most important limitation of Rutherford was regarding the orbits only, right? So Bohr introduced a term called stationary orbits, and gradually we will see that how this particular problem was solved by Bohr, right? So if we go to the Bohr's theory, first we need to see what are the postulates of the theory given by Niels Bohr, what the postulates were, right? The postulates were very simple. In the first postulate, Bohr has said that yes, the electrons are moving around the nucleus only, and the orbit term was also accepted, that yes, the electrons move in fixed path, which was called orbit. But what was not said by Rutherford and it was said by Bohr is that these orbits are circular in nature, right? These orbits are circular in nature, and as long as one electron is moving in one particular fixed orbit, its energy will not change. Okay, so if an electron is revolving in the same orbit for ever and ever and ever and ever, then its energy will also be same for ever and ever and ever, right? So if the electron doesn't move from its place, doesn't move means it doesn't move from its orbit, right, then its energy will be same. But whenever the electron moves from one orbit to the other orbit, its energy will change. Okay, now if the electron is moving to some orbit which is towards the nucleus, right, see, towards the nucleus means less energy zone, away from the nucleus means high energy zone, right, or more energy zone. So if some electron is moving from third orbit to second orbit, what will happen? Its energy will decrease. Energy of the electron will decrease. Why? Because the energy of third orbit is less than that of the energy of the energy of third orbit is more than that of the energy of the second orbit, right? So suppose whenever the electron is moving from third orbit to the second orbit, it's due to matching of energy of the electron with the second orbit, some energy will be released. That means whenever an electron moves close to the nucleus, its energy decreases and energy is emitted or released. Similarly, if the reverse happens, the electron goes from the third to fourth, then what will happen? The fourth orbit is having more energy than the third orbit. Okay, so it needs to absorb, need to gain some energy. So electron will gain energy and then it can move towards some higher orbit, say from 3 to 4, right? So if we summarize this, if an electron moves towards the nucleus, its energy will decrease. If it moves away from the nucleus, its energy will increase. That means if an electron moves towards the nucleus, it will release energy, whereas if it moves away from the nucleus, it will absorb energy, right? So this was the first postulate. The second postulate was somehow similar or related to the first postulate in that way, that the angular momentum of an electron is quantized, means it can be defined by a definite quantity. For example, say if the angular momentum of the second orbit is 2, then for third orbit it will be 3, for fourth orbit it will be 4. Basically, if we want to explain it, we need to explain it using the what I can say, the expression given by Bohr, right? That is h by 2 pi. So angular momentum of each of these orbits will be the integral multiple of h by 2 pi. For first orbit maybe h by 2 pi, 1h by 2 pi. For second orbit maybe 2h by 2 pi. For first orbit maybe 3h by 2 pi. So we can write it as nh by 2 pi also. Okay. Now this angular momentum, it has a relation with the h by 2 pi in such a way that m here is equal to nh by 2 pi. Okay, where m is mass, v is velocity, r is radius, and n is the number of the orbit, and h is Planck's constant, right? And its value is 6.626 into 10 to the power minus 34 joules second. Okay, and the main final postulate of Bohr said that that is a Bohr quantum condition. It is the stationary orbit thing, right? That energy levels are stationary and they were denoted as 1, 2, 3, 4 and so on. Okay. Bohr's other postulates were also there. If we go to the details, right? Now, the fifth postulate said that the frequency of the frequency emitted can be discussed with this particular thing, that is delta E is equal to h nu, right? By this the frequency can be discussed, and the stationary concept thing basically explains that if the electron moves from one to the other, the energy change will not be continuous, rather it will be discrete. Okay, discrete means a particular packet of energy may be absorbed, may be emitted, right, when the electron moves from one orbit to the other. Now, using Bohr's theory, we can do some calculations that we will see in the next lecture, that how to calculate the radius, the velocity and the energy of electrons using Bohr theory. That we will see in our next lecture, right? Okay, Bohr's model was basically applicable for the one electron system. A one electron system means he was easily able to explain the details of an electron, if the details of an atom, the atomic model, if there was only one electron. Means his applicable was basically his theory was basically applicable for hydrogen, right? Because hydrogen contains one electron only. Now, if we say for helium plus, then also it will be applicable. If we say for lithium 2 plus or beryllium 3 plus, then also Bohr's theory will be applicable, because in these particular ions also there is only one electron, right? So basically Bohr's theorem was applicable for, Bohr's atomic model rather, was applicable for one electron system, right? And it was also at par with the other laws of classical physics, right? And Bohr was easily able to say what is line spectrum of hydrogen. See, basically line spectrum means there are two terms, right? One is band spectra, another is line spectra. So initially it was said that the spectrum were lines, okay? They were single lines, but gradually when more powerful microscopes came, it was found that the single line was nothing but a combination of different energy states, which were called actually bands, right? And also we can explain the atomic and the atomic spectra from this particular thing, from the electromagnetic spectrum sort of thing. That is, whenever an electron moves from lower energy state to higher energy state, what happens? It absorbs some energy. Gradually we get the absorption spectra, and the reverse happens. Whenever the electron moves from higher energy to lower energy state, it will release some particular amount of energy, and we will get the corresponding emission spectra, right? So this was all about the Rutherford and the Bohr atomic model. We have clearly seen that Rutherford has postulated few things using his experiment. Then again, he has got some drawbacks and some merits also, right? These drawbacks were somehow solved by Bohr's atomic model, but there were few limitations of Bohr atomic model also. Just like Bohr was unable to give an atomic model for multi-electron system, his atomic model was only applicable for one electron system. This was the first one. Second thing is that Bohr's atomic model cannot be explained, cannot explain the Stark effect and the Zeeman effect, that is the movement of lines in electric field and magnetic field respectively. So there were, see, every model has got some drawbacks, right? So Bohr model was also having some drawbacks, but the merits that are given by the model was very, very high, right? So these were the details of the Rutherford and the Bohr atomic model. Now this lecture will be followed by certain questions, right? You try to answer those questions, and if you face any difficulty, just call me up or send me a mail or message, and we will discuss about it, right? Okay, so thank you so much. See you in the next lecture. Bye.